Hi, I'm Alyssa Lakota, and this is the presentation for my Action Research project. My research question was, how does explicit and repetitive phonics intervention increase a student's reading level in African American economically disadvantaged first graders? I chose this to identify a group of struggling students in the school, identify what their needs were, and to create an intervention plan to eventually determine if that is beneficial in small group instruction. The plans are repetitive and intensive and can be beneficial to all students. But why? So I chose this question to not only help the students, but to aid the teachers in their phonics instruction. After interviewing the reading specialist, principal, and multiple different teachers, I had determined that the teachers weren't satisfied with the curriculum Journeys had provided them on their phonics instruction. I wanted to determine if repetitive instruction can improve the student's performance and to determine the effects of explicit phonics instruction for all diverse students. So not only was I doing the intervention with the students, I did a professional development for the teachers so they could use some of the same strategies I found in their classroom. So the school I did this at was Lafayette Elementary. The female-to-male ratio is 53% male and 47% female. 99% of students receive a free lunch, with 1% receiving at least a reduced lunch. Lafayette was ranked in the top 20% for school diversity. Only 25 to 29% of students achieve proficient on the PSSAs, and that scores them in the bottom 50% of schools in PA. So the students that are really struggling to be on grade level with their reading ability. For the literature connections, I chose to use the findings of Isabel Beck and McIntyre. They both presented multiple of the same strategies to use. So I'm going to jump around a little bit. So the letter sound recognition, to emphasize that I used sound cards. So the students would have to identify the sound, the spelling, and relate it to a photo. I'm going to show you a picture of that now. This is what the sound card I used. So in the class it would go something like this: sound card, orange, sound, or, spelling, OR. After doing the letter sound recognition, we would move on to word building. During the word building, the students would use the Alconen boxes. They would have to determine which box to use depending on the number of sounds in the word that they hear. After doing word building, the students would move on to their writing skills. During the writing, they would be required to write the words that we did during the word building activities. After writing, we would move on to reading, where the students would read a decodable grade level text using the sounds that we had been working on. For example, the OR, the book we read, would be centered on OR words. During reading, we would focus on comprehension, making inferences on what would happen next and referring back to what we had already read. While doing all of this, we are focusing on text structure, paying attention to our capitalization, punctuation, and flow of the reading or writing. For the methodology, I worked with the students 2 times per week for 10 weeks at a duration of 45 minutes. To get my students, I referred to the Dibbles testing, which prompts the intervention grouping for grade 1, and I did a Journeys diagnostic assessment. On that assessment, I focused on the spelling portion, which included the 10 words to the right: fork, yarn, sip, shop, tub, coin, float, steep, drive, and spoon. Those 10 words determined where the students struggled. For example, the students for fork would write FRK or FRCK. For yarn, it would be YRN. They weren't recognizing the sound pairs, and they were struggling with identifying double sounds, for example, float, they would put F-O-T because they weren't taking the time to sound out the number of sounds they hear in the word. So after doing all of this, the 4 things listed on the top, sound cards, word building, writing, and reading, are what the lessons consisted of. I showed you an example of what the sound card looked like and the process of what that entailed. With the word building, I used the lists provided by Isabel Beck. Her words include things like sport, port, fork, fort, things like that. The students would use their finger. So for example, I would say fort. They would have to use their fingers, f or t. They would then determine, they would use the box with 3 sounds. They would build their word, we would read it together, and then we would move on. The same process would happen during the writing, where the students would have to write the word. First, they would sound it out, f or t, write the word, and underline the OR in the word to remind themselves that even though it is 2 letters, it makes 1 sound. After we did that portion of the writing, the students would have to use our new words in a sentence. After we completed the writing portion, we would move on to reading. We would read decodable texts that the students are able to read on their own. For my findings, Student 1 and Student 2 started off being able to read for their spelling, they were able to write 3 words correct. At the end of our intervention, they were able to write 6 correct. Student 3 was able to write 4 words to begin with, and he also moved up to writing 6 words correct. During their post-test, I noticed multiple different things. They were recognizing that there were more sounds in the words. They were identifying the FL in float. They were taking their time, focusing more, and that showed some massive improvement there. In conclusion, the student scores improved. The identification of sounds per word were improved, and sound pairs recognition improved. So they were able to identify the AR and the OR and the sounds that we had been working on, and in addition to identifying, just like I said, the more sounds per word. My recommendations for the students are to continue working in small group instruction. Continue working on the sound pairs, but move on to vowel pairs. So instead of doing the R-controlled vowels, move on to the OI or the OA, and help them improve with that. Something else I noticed was for fork, they would try to add the CK to it. So focus on those combinations and continue focusing on the number of sounds per word. When they take their time to sound out each word, I recognize a massive improvement. My references are Isabel Beck and McIntyre, and those were my findings from the project. Thanks.